1953, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency signed a document. It authorized a secret program. The program had one goal: to find a way to control the human mind. Over the next 20 years, the CIA ran experiments on thousands of people. Most of them had no idea it was happening. Some of them were given LSD in their coffee. Some were subjected to weeks of electroshock therapy. Some were kept in sensory deprivation for days. Some never recovered. The program was called MKUltra. When the government finally admitted it existed, most of the files had already been destroyed. On purpose. By order of the director of the CIA. This is what we know. And what we know is enough. To understand MKUltra, you need to understand 1953. The Soviet Union had just tested its first hydrogen bomb. The Korean War had just ended. Badly. American POWs were coming home saying strange things. Things that sounded like they had been brainwashed. The CIA was terrified. If the Soviets had discovered a way to control the human mind, America needed the same weapon, or a defense against it. And they needed it fast. On April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles approved Project MKUltra. He put a man named Sidney Gottlieb in charge. Sidney Gottlieb was, by every account, a brilliant man. He had a PhD in chemistry from Caltech. He grew his own food. He raised goats. He folk danced on weekends. He also had a club foot and a severe stutter. And he believed, deeply, that he was saving America. Gottlieb's weapon of choice was LSD. A Swiss chemist had accidentally discovered the drug in 1943. It caused hallucinations, paranoia, complete psychological disorientation. Gottlieb believed it could be used to break enemy agents, to make people confess, to make people forget, to make people do things they would never choose to do. The problem was, LSD had to be tested, and Gottlieb needed test subjects. People who couldn't say no. People whose disappearance or deterioration would go unnoticed. MKUltra eventually grew to include more than 150 separate research projects at more than 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, and CIA safe houses. At least 44 American colleges and universities were involved. Most of them didn't know they were working for the CIA. The subjects were chosen carefully. Mental patients who had no one advocating for them. Prisoners who had no legal recourse. Drug addicts promised heroin in exchange for participation. People on the margins. People the system had already decided didn't matter. Whitey Bulger was one of them. The man who would later become Boston's most feared crime boss was a 27-year-old federal prisoner in Atlanta when CIA researchers approached him. They offered a reduced sentence in exchange for participation. He agreed. For 15 months, he was given LSD regularly. He later wrote that the experiments gave him nightmares and psychological damage that never fully healed. At Harvard University, a 17-year-old student named Ted volunteered for what he was told was a study on personality. For 3 years, he was subjected to psychologically brutal sessions designed to attack and humiliate his deepest beliefs. Researchers documented his reactions in detail. The study's methods were consistent with MKUltra protocols. That student was Ted Kaczynski, who later became the Unabomber. The direct connection to MKUltra has never been officially confirmed, but it has never been officially denied either. In Montreal, Canada, A psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron was running a program he called psychic driving. Patients, many of them treated for anxiety and depression, were put into medically induced comas for weeks. Tape recordings were played into their ears hundreds of thousands of times. Electroshock therapy was administered at voltages 30 to 40 times higher than standard practice. When patients finally woke up, some had forgotten how to speak. Some had forgotten their own children's names. Some had forgotten everything. Cameron called it de-patterning. The goal was to erase a person's personality and rebuild it from scratch. It didn't work. It just erased people. In San Francisco and New York, the CIA ran one of the most disturbing sub-programs of MKUltra. It was called Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA rented apartments in both cities. They hired workers to lure men off the street. The men were brought back to the apartments. Their drinks were laced with LSD. And CIA agents watched from behind one-way mirrors, taking notes. The men had not consented to anything. They did not know they were being experimented on. They did not know the CIA was watching them. They did not know their psychological reactions were being cataloged for a government report. The program ran for years. The CIA officer in charge was a man named George White, who later wrote in his diary, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill and cheat, steal, deceive, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" That quote is from a declassified document. George White was never charged with a crime. He retired from the CIA with full benefits. Of all the people harmed by MKUltra, one story stands out. Not because it's the worst, but because it came closest to an answer. Frank Olson was an Army biochemist. He worked at Fort Detrick, Maryland, the U.S. government's Center for Biological Weapons Research. He had a wife, 3 children. He coached Little League. In November 1953, Olson attended a CIA retreat at a cabin in rural Maryland. 10 scientists gathered for what they were told was a working weekend. On the second day, Sidney Gottlieb secretly added LSD to the after-dinner liqueur. He told them 20 minutes later. Frank Olson had a severe reaction. He became paranoid, withdrawn, deeply disturbed. In the days that followed, colleagues described him as a completely different person. The CIA sent him to New York to see a psychiatrist. He checked into the Statler Hotel on the 13th floor. His CIA handler stayed in the same room. On November 28, 1953, at 2:30 in the morning, Frank Olson went through his hotel window. He fell 13 stories. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 43 years old. The CIA told his wife it was suicide. They told her Frank had jumped. They told her nothing about the LSD. They told her nothing about the experiment. For 20 years, she believed them. In 1975, a congressional investigation revealed Frank Olson's name for the first time. President Ford personally apologized to the family. The CIA director met with them at Langley. The government paid them $750,000. Frank's son, Eric, never stopped asking questions. In 1994, he had his father's body exhumed. A forensic examination found something the original autopsy had missed: blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being knocked unconscious before going through the window. The New York District Attorney opened a homicide investigation. It was closed in 2012. Insufficient evidence. No one was ever charged. Frank Olson's case remains officially unsolved. By 1972, MKUltra had been running for nearly 20 years, and the Watergate scandal was beginning to unravel the Nixon administration. Congressional investigations were opening everywhere. People were asking questions. Richard Helms was the director of the CIA. He knew what was in those files. In January 1973, he ordered the destruction of all MKUltra records. Thousands of files, 20 years of experiments, the names of the subjects, the names of the institutions, the names of the doctors. Gone. Helms later testified before Congress. He said he destroyed the files because he was worried about sources and methods. He was never charged with obstruction. He was later named U.S. ambassador to Iran. 4 years later, in 1977, a journalist named John Marks submitted a Freedom of Information request. What came back changed everything. 20,000 documents, misfiled in a financial records building, forgotten when the rest were shredded. They were enough. In August 1977, the Senate convened special hearings. The CIA director, Stansfield Turner, testified. He confirmed that MKUltra had existed. He confirmed that experiments had been performed on unwitting subjects. He confirmed that the files had been destroyed. Senator Ted Kennedy asked the question that the families of victims had been asking for years. How many people were involved? How many were harmed? The CIA's answer: they didn't know, because the files were gone. No one was criminally charged for MKUltra. Not Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the program for years. Not Richard Helms, who ordered the files destroyed. Not a single CIA officer, doctor, or contractor. Sidney Gottlieb retired in 1973. He moved to a farm in Virginia. He raised fish. He volunteered at a hospice for the dying. He died in 1999. He was never charged with a crime. The Canadian government settled with some of Dr. Cameron's victims in 1994, $100,000 each, for having their memories erased, for forgetting their children's names, for the years they never got back. The U.S. government settled with a small number of American victims. Most were never identified, because the files were gone. Here is what we know for certain. The CIA ran a program for 20 years that deliberately harmed American citizens, without their knowledge, without their consent, in the name of national security. The people who designed it believed they were protecting their country. Sidney Gottlieb believed that. Allen Dulles believed that. And that is, perhaps, the most disturbing part. The people who were harmed were not spies. They were not enemies. They were patients in hospitals. They were prisoners serving sentences. They were people who accepted drinks from strangers. They were a biochemist who coached Little League. They were ordinary people. And the government that was supposed to protect them used them as laboratory equipment. The 20,000 documents that survived are available to the public today. You can read them. The National Security Archive has them. The CIA's own reading room has them. They are real. What they don't contain are the names of most of the people who were harmed. Those names were in the files that were shredded. We will never know how many people were affected. We will never know what happened to all of them. In 1977, Senator Ted Kennedy said, "The deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign." That quote is from the congressional record. It is not a theory. It is testimony. The Cold War ended in 1991. MKUltra ended in 1973. But the question it raises never ended. How much are you willing to do to protect a country from its enemies? And when the people being harmed are your own citizens, at what point does the country become the enemy? If the government did this and buried the evidence, what else is still buried? Next episode, we find out. Subscribe so you don't miss it.